Hi folks, I'm Dan Dworkis, and this is the Emergency Mind Project, a space where we bring together lessons from the emergency department and beyond about performance when it matters the most and applying knowledge under pressure. In this critical concepts video, we're going to dive deep into a core idea or mental model that we use in the Emergency Mind Project, and we're going to do it in about 5 minutes and about 5 slides. Ready? All right, let's get to it. All right, folks, our model today is applying graduated pressure, which is also called the Wedge Model. So let's jump in. So here's the problem. Applying knowledge under pressure is hard. Now, that's a little bit obvious, right? If it were easy, there's probably no reason that you'd be here working on the Emergency Mind Project sort of stuff. So we all know that applying knowledge under pressure is hard. But one of the reasons that it's so hard to apply knowledge under pressure is that pressure often comes in step functions, right? And what we mean by this is that there's some level of pressure, and then all of a sudden you're called upon to do a task or to deliver a skill in a particular environment, and the level of pressure goes from 0 to 60 as fast as possible, right? It's like hitting a brick wall. So even if you have some training and some skill at the lower pressure sort of space, all of a sudden you're called upon to do it in an environment which is really different than what you're used to, right? So pressure comes in step functions. As an example of this, imagine that I asked you to do a particular skill set in the middle of a patient who is in cardiac arrest, right? In the middle of running a code blue scenario. So even if you had some training about what drugs to use, about how to do a particular airway technique, and maybe you'd studied it in theory, maybe you'd done it on a mannequin, all of a sudden doing it for the first time in a real life scenario where somebody's life is on the line is a very different situation, right? This is a huge step up function in terms of the amount of pressure that you're under when you're called upon to do a particular skill set. So what do we do instead, right? Instead of building a step function, we apply graduated pressure, right? We apply pressure gradually in a way that allows us to practice over and over again and get good at a particular thing. Okay, so here it is in all its glory, so to speak. This is the Wedge Model. The Wedge Model is not rocket science, right? In fact, it's actually, wedges are very simple machines. But what we have here is instead of a step function, we have a gradual on-ramp of increasing pressure, in this case labeled as stress, right? So as we move from the low end, which we call the low wedge end, all the way up to the high wedge end, we're gradually increasing that stress. Okay, so what does that look like in practice, right? It means that if this is a high wedge scenario, right? This is a scenario where you are full bore, real life, trying to get things done. They're complicated, they're stressful, life is on the line. What you want to do is find low wedge scenarios that are similar to but less stressful than the high wedge scenarios you're going to operate in. Right, so here's an example of a group of folks practicing a technique on a rescue dummy on Rescue Annie here. And they are creating, in this case, a simulation, which is a lower wedge scenario of working in the real cardiac arrest situation. Now, you could imagine an even lower wedge scenario than this, which is just sort of sitting around and talking about what might happen, right? And so as you move from learning a thing in theory to gaming it out mentally or doing visualization techniques, to practicing it in not bad or moderate amounts of stress and pressure in a simulated environment like this, all the way up to the real deal when you're doing it in real life. There you go. There you have it. That's the Wedge Model, right? So you got high wedge real life, low wedge practice environments. Now, one thing about this that's super important, as you're using this model in your training, it's really tempting to focus entirely on the successes, right? To think to yourself as you add little bits of pressure and stress, wow, I'm doing a great job. I'm moving ahead. I'm really like succeeding at every place. And that's awesome, right? Success is important. You want to do good things. But it's equally important to pay attention to the failures here, right? Your job using the Wedge Model is to fail as cheaply as possible. In other words, you want to find all the problems with your technique in the low wedge environments. So you really want to celebrate the time when you have a low wedge scenario that puts you into a space where you're unable to perform. That's great. That's cheap learning. That's something you were able to identify, pick up, and fix before you got into a high wedge scenario. All right, so successes and failures, low wedge and high wedge. There you go, folks. That is the Wedge Model. And here's your challenge, right? There's 2 challenges for you in the coming week after you're listening to this video or watching this video. One is, where can you use the Wedge Model this week, right? Where can you take a look at a place where there is a step function already, and how can you try to replace it with a wedge? And a similar, pretty related challenge is, how can you build both low and high wedge training into your development? right? How do you build low and high wedge into your training? So how can you find spaces that are similar to but different than the real life, put them into your training, and then how can you go back and forth along that wedge and practice sometimes the technique in low wedge scenarios and sometimes the technique in high wedge scenarios to really practice your stress buffering and your ability to handle pressure. All right, that's it for the wedge model. I hope you enjoyed that. And I hope it's something that you can use no matter what sort of discipline you're working in. If you liked this and you want to get more involved in the Emergency Mind Project, we would love to have you. Don't forget to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel here, but also come visit us at emergencymind.com. There are so many great ways to get involved in the Emergency Mind Project community. An easy one in the upper right up here is taking our crisis skills test. And again, you can find us at emergencymind.com. All right, good luck out there.